The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back, George Grimm and I, comfortably zoned in a vat of pine tar. The podcast that talks about the book, that talks about the podcast. As our guest, Michael Duca would say. George, let me get a sound check. Make sure you're okay.
Hi, Ralph. Hi, Mike. Good to be here.
Good.
Hi, George.
And a sound check from you, Mr. Duca.
This is Michael Duca.
All right. We are set to go. And Michael, you were a big part. You're featured in the book. And we so much enjoyed doing your part of the book, which again is based on podcasts that we did over the years. And first, without further delay, we have a clarification. Michael, would you clarify?
Yes, unfortunately, there's a small but significant factual error in my piece, and it comes near the end. I have to confess that I have never set foot inside Safeco Field, but the story is 100% true. It was just located at Pac Bell Park in San Francisco.
Okay.
All right. Tell us the story, if you would.
Well, we talked for a few moments about the fan experience at the ballpark, and I mentioned that I had been at Pac Bell Park on its opening day. In fact, I get to carry to my grave with me the fact that I was the first person to ever go down the Coke bottle slide because I got to the ballpark at 8 in the morning. But I also was able to go outside the press box and stand at the top of the escalator that comes up to that area from the Willie Mays Plaza and see the look on people's faces as they crested the top of the escalator and saw the field spilling in front of them for the first time. And it was a magical moment. You know, some people actually started crying. It was, of course, so many years that we had gone through, so many iterations. Dianne Feinstein wanting to dome Candlestick and then build a park somewhere else downtown, and all the stuff that we'd gone through, and votes that succeeded. And
the threats of moving is 2, maybe 3 times serious threats to whether or not there would be baseball in San Francisco or Toronto or Colorado. How close did it come, Michael, at times?
The Giants were essentially gone to Tampa Bay. I remember distinctly the Bermuda shorts-wearing city manager of Tampa Bay welcoming the Giants to town. Bob Lurie had struck a deal with them, and the only thing that was pending was approval by the owners. And I remember that I had written personal letters to every single baseball owner, plus Bill White, the president of the National League, methodically laying out the economic case for not leaving the 5th largest market in the country and going to the third, what at the time was about the 28th or 29th largest market in the country, and the demographics thereof. Over the years, my economic analysis has proven to be fairly accurate, since the Tampa Bay Rays have had an extraordinarily successful team over the last decade or so, and they still don't draw very well. So it was probably a boon to the Giants that they didn't wind up going there, but they were saved at the last minute. And I remember, of all the letters I wrote, I got exactly 2 responses, one from Bill White and one delightfully crafted personal letter that said that under no circumstances would he as an owner ever vote to permit the Giants to leave the San Francisco Bay Area from Peter O'Malley.
Oh, wow. He knew where the bread is buttered on the rivalry, that's for sure. Let me get back to that view people got when they got off the escalator and of the park and the beauty of it. I'll ask you, what's more dramatic, the view from inside the park or the view from outside the park?
Well, if you pick your location carefully, it's the view from inside the park because you get the view of the park and the outside. Okay. I'm a charter seat holder there, even though I've never sat in my seats because I've always been employed since the park opened. But my seats look straight down the first baseline from the front row of the upper deck. You can see the Bay Bridge from there. You can see the East Bay from there. You can see all of China Basin from there. And, of course, you can see all of the ballpark from there. It's a pretty spectacular view. The view from the opposite side, if you go down by the first base line or actually down by the right field foul pole, is even more spectacular because the skyline peers over the top of the stadium.
Wow. George, you're not a native Californian. Michael and I have lived in Northern California for years. Unless you see that particular view that Michael's talking about, you can't appreciate it. So here's my invitation to you. Come out, we'll have a book signing, and we'll get to see the view.
Okay.
How about that?
I was in San Francisco many years ago with my parents. Many years ago, probably in mid 1960s or so. So and it was a beautiful city then, and I wish I would be able to go back. Yeah,
it'll be fun.
Well,
Michael,
I can tell you this, Ralph, if you don't mind me interrupting for a moment here. When they were bidding for the contract to design and construct the stadium, remember this site at the time was basically a flat-topped wooden pier upon which a battery factory had existed for many decades. It was a toxic waste site. There was absolutely nothing charming about it. And HOK Architects put in their proposal that they would consider it a privilege to be able to design a stadium on the, and I quote, most dramatic venue site for a sports facility outside of Cortina d'Ampezzo in Italy.
Oh, wow.
They were pretty open.
Some high praise. May I get back, Michael, to what you were saying about the people who stopped the potential move to Tampa Bay? And you mentioned you got a letter from Bill White, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Bill White who said, the Giants will move to Tampa Bay over my dead body. And his hatred of the area came from when the Cardinals did their spring training in St. Petersburg at Al Lang Field, which they shared with the Yankees at the time. And White and his contemporaries, who were black, as was he, were forced to go across the tracks. And what that meant was that they couldn't use the facilities that their teammates used, and they had to go to boarding houses, fans that would take him in and what have you. And there was the racial divide was incredible, and this wasn't in the 30s and 40s. This was in the 60s, and that stuck with him forever. And he hated Tampa, or Florida, in that area. And if I'm not mistaken, he is the one that was most responsible for queering the deal to send the Giants to Tampa. Do you recall that, Michael?
We may never know what went on behind closed doors, but I can tell you that the letter, from my recollection, and please forgive me if I get parts of this wrong, Bill, because it's been 25 years now, but my recollection of that letter was that he implied something to that effect. He said, if it's up to me, the Giants won't go anywhere. And I do know that Jim Crow was alive and well in Florida, particularly northern Florida, at that time. I'm not sure if Tampa Bay qualifies as North or South Florida. I think it's really Central Florida, but I know that that there was definitely a lot of Jim Crow issues going on in the South at that time, and Florida was perhaps more than it is today thought of as a southern state then.
Okay. So I'm not that far off, I guess. Let's put it that way. George, what would you like to ask Michael?
Yes. As the reporter for Major League Baseball, pitch by pitch, the official scorer, runner of the game clock in games, which of those responsibilities did you like the most or the least?
Well, I'm not going to pick on any of my employers and say I like them the least, but I would say that I probably get the most personal satisfaction out of official scoring. Okay. I view my job as an official scorer as being a keeper of or a custodian of the validity of historical records by doing my very best to make sure that today's players are judged by essentially similar standards so that outcomes can be compared. That having been said, official scoring has changed dramatically over the 19 years that I've done it, believe me. We've gone from not having replays in-house to having an array of digital instruments in front of us, everything from replay screens to iPads to laptops that allow us to view plays from multiple angles, view plays over and over again if we need to. So there have been some very, very positive changes in the application of technology to how we are able to do our job. Okay. What about the players? Have they ever confronted you about an error or a hit that they wanted or they didn't want? Well, the process for appealing has changed over the years due to some agreements in the CBA. And a few years ago, it changed to a process whereby a player or his representative, meaning his agent or attorney, could file an appeal up to 72 hours after a play, and that was different from how it used to be. It used to be that the media relations departments had to do it, and they got involved. And so in those days, there was a lot more contact between the players and the scorers, especially since COVID has come into being. Literally nobody has contact with the players anymore. Right. But yes, indeedy. I think Jason Schmidt still disagrees with me over a call that I made with Lance Necro at first base on a ball that was hit. Necro was a right-handed thrower, and it was a ball that was hit just to his right ever so slightly. He had to cross over and dive for the ball, and when he dove for the ball, he dove, quote-unquote, too soon. The ball wound up going over his glove. Okay. And I ruled it a hit, and Jason, who I had a great relationship with and who was quite the practical joker, and I never knew for sure how serious he was about this, but he ragged on me for weeks, saying, I don't know how you can possibly call that a hit. You know, he completely missed the ball. And my answer to Jason was, you know, you got to understand that the rules of scoring say ordinary player, ordinary effort. They don't say JT Snow's over there every single day of his life. Mm-hmm. And you were used to seeing JT make every play known, including some that couldn't be made.
He was the best fielding first baseman I've seen since Vic Power.
Yeah, and you're a tad older than I am. Vic Power was at the start of my time paying attention to baseball, but I was in a minor league city at that time, and there wasn't a whole lot of TV, so I never got to see Vic Power play. Other than I vaguely remember him hitting a ball in the 1954 World Series.
He used to come in with Kansas City to Yankee Stadium, and Kansas City at that time had very few great players. He was one of them, and he later went on.
Already.
Yeah, he went on to Cleveland. He was instrumental in making that team solid. They damn near won in 1959. So, and I have a love for him because he was the person that the Yankees most screwed over when they didn't integrate. If you remember that Ellie Howard was the first to break the color line for the Yankees, and I think that was 1956. Well, long before then, Power was a minor leaguer of extinction and not extinction, distinction, and they kept passing him over because he dated white women. That was basically it, and I thought that was horrible, and so I ended up really following him and liking him. Back in the days when a Dodger Giant fan who had been spurned and their teams moved, our teams moved, we couldn't root for the Yankees, but we love baseball, and we root specifically against the Yankees. And that we went from having 3 teams in New York to having 1 team, and that in itself was horrible. So that the prospect of the Giants moving again from San Francisco somewhere else really turned my stomach. And I'm particularly grateful to those who including Peter O'Malley, who objected to it. And what I don't understand is why the other owners would not give permission, because someday they may need the permission themselves. So it's very complicated, and there you go. I'll ask you a question. We talked off the air recently, Michael, and what was the story about Sabian's objection to one of your calls? That really interested me.
Well, this was, I'm going to say, probably around 2011, maybe 2012. My memory gets a little fuzzy now, but there was a game in late September The Giants were playing the Colorado Rockies at AT&T Park, or I think it might have been SBC at the time. I don't remember. And late in the game, Tim Lincecum was pitching, and late in the game there was a ground ball hit to third base. The third baseman that night was Rich Aurelia. It was near the end of his career, and he had transitioned off of shortstop. But third base was never one of his real strong suits. And he backed up on the ball and kind of let it play him, and the ball got away from him. I initially scored that as an error. The Rockies went on to score 2 runs with 2 outs in the inning, which were then unearned runs. But as I pointed out in the press box, I was going to go back and watch the play again after the game and go down and talk to Rich about it. And the nice thing about Rich Aurelia was that he and I had been friends for many years off the field, and so while I don't let that in any way taint my judgment of plays that he made, it did mean that I could go down and ask him a direct question and know that I would get an honest answer. And I asked him, should you have made that play? And he said, ball hit a pebble, took off on me. And so I changed the scoring of the play to a base hit, which made the 2 runs earned. This was late in September, and this was the year that Tim won his first Cy Young. And Giants general manager Brian Sabean was not pleased that I had changed the call. He was absolutely positive that those 2 earned runs were going to wind up costing Lincecum his Cy Young. What I found interesting about it was that by the time I got back up from the clubhouse and went around to talk to the writers individually, because as you gentlemen know, and we mention it in the book, it's like a church when guys are on deadline. There is no such thing as making a press box announcement. You get assaulted. But I went around to each of them individually and told them that we were changing the play and that it changed the earned runs. And I actually watched 2 national writers change the stories that they were working on their laptops as I told them that. And one of them literally deleted the phrase hometown scoring. So as it turns out, not only did it not cost Timmy his first Cy Young, it may have gathered him 1 or 2 votes.
Whoa. Did you talk to Sabean after that and kind of agree that all went well?
Brian and I had always gotten along well, and I knew that this would pass. I know that he wears his emotions on his sleeve sometimes, especially related to the team, and that he also gets over it. And when the team had its postseason postmortem for the writers, where the front office people are there, they did it in the Field Club lounge, so it was rather informal. And I went down and made a point of sitting next to Brian after I had been told to avoid him for a while. When the season was over, I sat down next to Brian. The awards were not yet announced, but it was pretty much consensus that Timmy was going to get the Cy Young that year. And I asked him if it was safe to sit next to him, and he said, yes, it's okay now.
Okay.
Gotten over it.
Before I turn it back to George, let me just ask you about anything about Tim Lincecum that you'd like to share. Personally, I thought he was brutally honest and ahead of his time with the way he related to the press and the fans. I thought he was great. Give me a little Tim Lincecum, if you would.
Probably my best Tim Lincecum story was I found online a digital video recording of Tim Lincecum pitching at the University of Washington. And it was shot from the third base dugout. So you had a crystal clear view of his entire motion. And it was on digital video, which means it was shot at 30 frames per second, which is faster than film. And at no point in that video, when Tim was in his motion, no single frame was able to stop his arm without it blurring. That's how much arm speed he generated. And the coolest thing about that was that I got to be the first person to show him that video. He'd never seen it before.
Wow.
I showed him that in spring training, and he said, "Please send that to me because I've literally never seen that before, and I love to have it." So that might have been the most interesting way that I ever got a personal email address from a player.
Nice. Tell me about the effect that his dad had on him. His dad was a surrogate pitching coach, a personal pitching coach, at least at one time in his career.
For quite a while. Chris was a very, very strong influence on Tim throughout high school, throughout college, and well into his professional career. And you might remember towards the end of his Giants career, Timmy kind of lost his way. And one of the problems was that everybody loved Timmy and everybody wanted to help Timmy, so everybody had a suggestion for him. I don't know if you'll recall this, but he was having difficulty locating pitches. He was trying to pitch inside and missing the inside corner, missing off the plate in both directions, to the point that he got so goofed up that he wound up literally pitching off the side of the rubber, not the back, not the front, the side, on a downhill slope on the side of the mound, trying to move the ball over to the side a little further. And, of course, he wound up throwing either across his body or turning his elbow inside out, which didn't help his arm health, and it still didn't solve his problem. The only thing that I remember is I saw Chris one day in Scottsdale when Timmy was struggling with it, and I said, I just have one thing I would suggest you. I would never tell Tim this directly, but you can tell him because he listens to you, and that is, suggest to him that he starts a game pitching from smack dab in the middle of the rubber and adjusts off of it. Let's just see what happens. And he wound up doing that and eventually getting back his ability to throw strikes. But it was really interesting because Chris was prickly with the media. He didn't feel like his influence on Tim was unusual or unnecessary or unwarranted, and he did not like the way that the media portrayed him as controlling him.
Okay, but you were the conduit between the two to address Tim.
One time only. Please don't call me for pitching help.
Okay. Well, too late. We've got the request in there. You'll look at your emails later, but never mind. George, take it away.
Okay, this is a question for both of you longtime baseball watchers. The AAA is supposed to have a robotic home plate umpire this year. What do you think about that? I won't answer it.
No, that is a very multifaceted question because I think it ruins the continuity of the game. And with the interest of getting the call right, I could understand where they're coming from. Michael.
Well, as much as I would like to answer that question, the minor leagues are owned by Major League Baseball now. And with the lockout and being an MLB employee, I literally am proscribed from commenting on that.
Okay. Wow. That feeling of being truly on the inside of baseball, Did you ever dream as a kid that you would be this influential in the game?
Well, if you sat in my chair making suggestions like I've made and seeing them die on the vine, you would know that influential isn't exactly the word that I would pick. Adjacent to, maybe, but not influential. But no, in my wildest dreams as a kid, I either thought I would be a broadcaster, or maybe because of my psychology training, I would get to manage someday. But no, I never thought I'd really be this closely involved in baseball operations.
Okay. One more thing, and then I'll for real turn it over to George. You and I had lunch once, and I asked you a question because of your ability to concentrate enough and literally on every pitch, whether or not scouting would have. I asked you if you had ever considered it, or I don't remember how I worded it, but your look gave me the impression that you were somewhat disappointed that it didn't involve, your career didn't involve scouting. And I think you would have been a great scout. Tell me why. And I know from your turning me on to Crawford years ago as the greatest shortstop of our time. And it was shortly after Vizquel played for the Giants, and I thought he was as solid as they came. I trust your scouting. Are you truly sad that you didn't become a scout, or at least had the experience of scouting?
That's a convoluted and long answer. I am truly sad that I was not wealthy enough in my 40s to book everything and go to scouting school. I think I could have been a good scout. I don't think I would have been a great scout, but I think I could have been a good scout. I will tell you this, scouting is a lot like education. If you want to be a teacher, you have to take more classes on education to teach kindergarten than you do elementary school, and more to teach elementary school than you do to teach high school, and more to teach high school than you do to teach college, which is none at all. That's upside down. And scouting is the same way. By far, the hardest job in scouting is the area scout, the guy who goes out and looks at 15-year-olds and tries to project them for what they're going to be at 25. That, to me, that's close to impossible. That's close to the toughest job I can imagine. And yet that's where everybody starts. And if you're absolutely good at that, they take you away from it. Instead of paying you more, in order to pay you more, they move you up the chain, and you start doing minor league scouting, and then you start doing major league scouting and advanced scouting. But yes, I think I could have been okay. And to your example, I thought Omar Vizquel was the best shortstop I ever saw until 2 years ago.
Until Crawford came along.
Until Crawford really blossomed into now what I think is a guy who makes the difficult plays look so simple that we don't realize how good he is. And Brandon always had a better arm than Omar. Omar compensated for his arm with brilliance in positioning and knowing the hitters and in knowing his pitchers. But Brandon has that ability to make the play from the left field foul line that very, very few shortstops can do.
What an arm he does have. But Vizquel had that quick release. And I don't know if that came from positioning or what. George, take it away. I'm going to fulfill my promise.
Okay, yes. Can you tell us the detail about the clubhouse boy on the Giants? I think his last name is Lowenstein, and there was a tribute for him with Willie Mays, and you were there. You had told us on a podcast that's in the book, actually, but I'd like to hear it again if you don't mind.
Well, you're going to have to remind me of exactly what about it was that you wanted me to say. Yes, all of those statements that you made are true. David Lowenstein, who was in fact the stepson of Al Rosen.
Yes,
and David worked for the Giants as a clubhouse guy for probably 25 years before passing away about 5 years ago. David had medical issues and multiple surgeries throughout his life, and finally, his body just gave up on him, unfortunately, at a relatively young age. If I remember correctly, David was in his 50s.
Okay.
But
and I think
refresh my memory about the specific thing.
Willie Mays was there, and Willie got up to speak before you did, and he really brought tears to everyone's eyes, and you decided that you didn't want to follow Willie Mays.
Well, nobody in their right mind wants to follow Willie Mays when Willie speaks.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, it's Willie. Second of all, it's Willie in the Giants clubhouse. And the memorial service was held in the clubhouse. Who in their right mind would ever want to follow that? But third of all was the absolute joy of just listening to Willie, because as he has aged, Willie has essentially taken all the filters and thrown them away. Everything that he never would say as a black player in Jim Crow America, he now has just stripped all the filters off. And sometimes that can be hilarious, and sometimes that can be incredibly, incredibly emotional and touching. And I do remember that he was very touched by being asked to speak about David, and that he had some great memories of David, who always took everything the players said seriously, even though about 99 times out of 100 they were pulling his chain.
Okay.
The Giants are a family, more so than any other team that I've ever heard or read about. Can you describe what that means when I say that? That the Giants have been able to put together a unit, past and present Giants, and who that revolves around. Does it not revolve around the clubhouse manager? And if so, say a few words about him.
Well, I think that Mike Murphy.
I lost it there for a second.
Yeah, Mike Murphy, who started out working for the San Francisco Seals, first baseman from Mission High School, and started out working with the San Francisco Seals. He worked for Lefty O'Doul. And Murph is still around in his capacity as emeritus clubhouse manager. Everybody to Murph is Kiddo. Good to see you, Kiddo. How you doing today, Kiddo? And he's that way with everybody he sees. He talks to my wife when she goes to work at the ballpark every day. And I have asked Mike numerous times, whenever you're ready to tell stories, I'm ready to record. And he said, most of the stories that I have to go to the grave with me. I promised people. I know there's an absolute gold mine there that we will probably never get to see. But in terms of creating a family atmosphere, I'm going to step outside the clubhouse and give you a different example that I think tells you what you're looking for here, Ralph. In 2010, after, 56 years of waiting, the Giants finally brought a world championship to San Francisco. And, of course, it was decided that they would have a parade, and not something like the Rams did yesterday with friends and family showing up. There were, I'm going to say, between 1 and 1.5 million people on Market Street that day. And the reason I know this is that I was in the parade. The reason that I was in the parade was that I was invited to walk with my wife, who works for the team. And she was in the parade because every single one of the 600 part-time ushers, plus the custodians, the maintenance people, the groundskeepers, the concessions workers, every person who worked at the ballpark was asked to come at 7 o'clock in the morning. They gave us breakfast. They gave us new hats. They gave us shirts. They gave us wristbands. They put us on buses, and all of them marched in the parade because it takes all of them to bring a championship to a city. And they were the first professional sports franchise in the United States to have their day of game employees participate in a championship parade. And they've done it 3 times.
Wow, good for them.
Nice. And what really strikes me is that it's been 12 years, and the time has flown so quickly.
We refer to that time period here, Ralph, as a posy. It's been a full posy.
Yeah, great catcher. That's who you're going to miss this year as a Giant. It cannot be replaced either on or off the field. That man, for players, he brought it together for the Giants.
I think he brought some. I think he brought some success to the pitching staff too, because I think pitchers wanted to throw to him.
Right. You know what gets me is that the Giants in this period of time came up with not one, not two, Lincecum, Kane, but I can't pronounce his name anymore, with a B. Anyway, they followed up and kept the pitching staff great. Which scout was most influential with that? Who in player development is to be credited?
Absolutely no question answer to that question.
Bumgardner is the man I was thinking of, but
right. Without question, the answer to your ask there is Dick Tidrow, the late Dick Tidrow. His loss last year will be felt for years to come in San Francisco. Dick Tidrow was not only a rare talent in his ability to see a pitcher throw 2 or 3 pitches and know what he could do and what he was doing wrong. He had the rare skill of being able to communicate it and the personality to allow you to accept his criticism.
Gotcha. Got it. They called him Dirt, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. They called him Dirt. Graduate. He went to Chabot College. He's a local guy. Of course, made his bones on the Yankees pitching staff. But I have never met a man who knew more about pitching.
He never rose to the position of pitching coach. Was he happy with that? Was he frustrated with that?
No, he loved what he did. He was able to travel around the country. He was instrumental in. He was the final evaluation before the draft. If Dick Tidrow didn't say you should be drafted, you weren't drafted by the Giants.
Okay.
And you may remember that Tim Lincecum dropped to the Giants at number 10, and when the Giants took him, everybody goes, "Oh my God, they took that little kid out of Washington who has, he's got no meat on his bones. He'll never be able to pitch in the major leagues." I mean, it was generally considered to be a wasted signing 2 Cy Youngs and 3 World Series later.
Yeah. It's body movement, and he had that quickness to his arm like no one I've ever seen. Body-wise, he was like Bobby Shantz, just a little guy. I wonder if he'd even be signed today. Has the game shifted so much to power?
Well, with Dick's passing, I'd have to say probably not. I don't know anybody else who's that kind of pitching guru who can look at 18 and see 28.
Yeah. Projection.
Good point.
I mean, he also
George.
in the signing of Madison Bumgarner out of high school in North Carolina.
Yeah, I didn't mean to slight him, but he's had a terrific career, and he's remained a pretty good force even after the Giants with Arizona and what have you. Did you get to know him a little bit?
Probably the number one competitor I've ever met in my life. Madison Bumgarner would want to beat you walking across the street. He was competitive at absolutely everything that he did. In the 2010 World Series clinching game, I was in Texas. I was sitting in the stands with my wife on one side of me and his father on the other side of me.
Wow.
And I asked, who by that time I had nicknamed him Dad Bum, and I asked his father, where does Madison, I mean, at that time, you remember, he was 20 years old and setting age records in the World Series in 2010. And I asked him, where did Madison get that beat you at any cost mentality? And he laughed very, very derisively and said, clearly from his mother, from whom he was divorced.
Yeah, having a son from a woman who didn't like me very much, I understand that feeling, that look. But I will never forget the look in your eye when I asked you about the scouting possibilities, and you just that look said it all. And you can't come back and do it again, but something about it that led me to believe that you would have been a great scout. Just tell me about the concentration it takes to watch every pitch of a game. Where did you develop that?
I have no idea. I think I was born with it. I mean,
okay.
It's not even. It's something which, if you take the time to think about it, you're no longer doing it. It has to be almost natural. And I'll tell you, it slips every once in a while, and every damn time it does, you get caught. Every time it slips, you see, that you're looking away, you're looking down at your score sheet, you glance away between pitches, and something happens. Umpire calls time and he calls a balk, or he calls interference, or something goofy happens that had you been watching, you'd have certainly seen everything fine, but you weren't watching. So you learn very quickly that the game goes on even between the pitches, and you have to pay attention. In particular, when I'm doing something like running the clock, I have to pay special attention because, there are times that you don't start the clock because a close play has happened, and instead you start a shorter clock that gives the time limit for how long they have to appeal, and you have to use your judgment on those plays, and you want to get them right, because if you hit the wrong button, TV will go to commercial break, and maybe miss the replay and maybe miss the call. So there's a lot of reasons that in all of the things that I do, you have to be 100% focused on the game while you're there. There are a lot of people in the press box who think I'm kind of antisocial because I just, I don't even look at them when I tell them I can't talk to you.
Okay. George, close us out. We've had a terrific guest.
That's about it from me, Ralph and Mike. Mike, it's been a pleasure to have you on and talk to you, answer your questions, and it's been a pleasure to include your podcast in the book. I hope you enjoyed it.
I thank you. Having done a couple of hundred interviews for my book and having transcribed the majority of them myself, I want to say thank you for taking my run-on sentences, rambling thoughts, and lousy grammar and turning them into English for the book.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very well put, but unnecessarily self-deprecating. You are articulate and terrific, and I value your friendship on a personal level. So, Michael, thank you.
I share the thoughts. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, Ralph.
Well, it's a great day for me talking to two of my favorite people in the world on the same podcast. George, I've told you many times the experience of sharing our enterprise, or whatever the hell you want to call it, was the most enjoyable. Can't imagine. Tell people out there what it's like to work with a man who's emotionally stable. It so complements my personality well. Thank you guys for a great podcast and a great life's experience. Be well. Thank you for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Network. The name of the show is Comfortably Zoned in Nevada Pine Tar. The podcast about the book about a podcast. How about that? Be well, everybody. And stay healthy. And we'll talk to you down the baseball road. Adios.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.